Welcome, everybody. This is a very exciting night. Vivian Gornick is here. Catherine LaSota is going to moderate. It's really a thrill to welcome a legend like Vivian to Queens College and an MFA alum. Catherine's going to say more by way of introduction, so I'll keep this short, but I just want to acknowledge that Vivian is one of a handful of writers who I think truly defined creative nonfiction for the culture. And she did it, she created a model of personal narrative that was both cultural criticism and political commentary that has influenced so many of us. She basically showed us how it's done. And personally, I'll just say I'm continuously impressed in your writing, Vivian, your acute observation and your way of articulating your observations in this with fierce candor. It's just, I love that about your writing. So I'll let you know a little bit more about Catherine. Catherine LaSota, graduated with her MFA in creative nonfiction from right here in our MFA program. Many of you know her, and if you know her, you know she's a force. She's now Associate Director of Social Practice CUNY, which I encourage you to ask her about her job because you cannot believe how fun the stuff she gets to do for her job is. But I'll let her tell you. She's the founder of the Resort Writing Community and host of the Cabana Chats podcast on writing and community. From 2015 to 2020, Catherine hosted the acclaimed LIC reading series. I had the pleasure of reading that series. It's the most fun I ever had doing a reading. Those were fantastic days. She's the former executive director of the Center for the Study of Social Difference at Columbia. Her writing appears in LitHub, Electric Literature, Vice, the Brooklyn Rail, Catapult, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. And she lives with her husband and 2 children in Queens. Before I turn it over to Catherine, I just want to let you know you've got flyers for our next event, which is March 20th, and we are going to be celebrating the publication of Rebecca Suzuki's beautiful book, When My Mother Is Most Beautiful. Rebecca is here. Many of you have read this book, so you know just what a beautiful reading experience it is. It's absolutely gorgeous, and we're really excited for that event too. So I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Jason. I did bring this whole stack of Vivian's books with me just to show everyone what she's given us. It's only one page. Yeah. So it is really quite an honor to be here tonight with Vivian Gornick. I think I speak for everyone in the room saying that she's written so many impactful books over the years. I'm sure folks in this room and who are watching online have been introduced to your work in all kinds of different ways. I first encountered it when I read The Situation and the Story as a young writing student. There's also these amazing memoirs, of course, Fierce Attachments, which, no big deal, the New York Times book critics selected as the #1 memoir of the past 50 years. That's 50. Just a rag called the New York Times. And then The Odd Woman and the City, called A Guidebook for How to Exist, right, by Catherine Taylor, LA Review of Books. There's so many more. So I'm going to introduce Vivian very briefly tonight. Then we'll hear her read for about 20 minutes. And then I'll be in conversation with her about her writing through the years and her newest work. And then there'll be time for some questions. So get those questions going in your mind for near the end of, I think we're here till 8:30. So for Vivian Gornick, Self-narrative is a form of cultural criticism. The personal is decidedly political. Born in the Bronx, she grew up in a family of working-class immigrants with parents who were committed communists. By the way, see The Romance of American Communism, first published in 1977, reissued in 2020. Since the 1960s, she's been a writer of journalism, essays, and memoirs. Much of her writing explores the actual and metaphoric significance of being an outsider, perpetually half in, half out. Despite her claim that feminism ended her attachment to Judaism, the experience of being twice an outsider, Jewish and female, serves for her as a powerful lesson in marginality. In works on feminist radicals, Elizabeth Cady Stanton came out in 2005, and Emma Goldman in 2011. She has expanded the autobiographical form to include the biographical, offering an ideological and genealogical starting point for Gornick's own involvement in second wave feminism, which I think is notable. We're here on the eve of International Women's Day tomorrow. She is currently at work on a book about CUNY's City College of New York. She is going to share some of that work with us tonight. We are so lucky. Vivian, thank you for being here. I can't wait to hear and chat after you read.
To be here. In all my years of being involved with New York City colleges, I've never been out to Queens. It's like coming, I was telling Kimiko, it was like coming to Philadelphia from Manhattan to get here was like another trip. Okay, I am a really old lady. I went to school in the 1950s. And I went to CCNY, as you just learned. I was born and raised in the Bronx. My parents were working class Jewish immigrants. And for us, it was City College or nothing, which I'm going to start with. So now I am writing a memoir. I'm trying to write this memoir. It's not as easy as I thought it would be. Put together some memories of what it was like to go to school then, City College, and what I make of it, okay? So here are about 15 of the first pages. As thousands before me have said, for us it was City College or nothing. I enjoyed the solidarity those words invoked, but rejected the implied deprivation. From first day to last, I felt privileged to be a student at City, privileged and profoundly at home. It was not from the faculty that City drew its reputation for intellectual goodness. It was from its students. It was from us. Not that we were intellectually distinguished, we weren't, but our hungry energy vitalized the place. Most of us had been reading in bottled up silence from the age of 6 on, and City College was our great release. At City, I sat talking in a basement cafeteria until 10 or 11 at night with a half dozen others who also never wanted to go home to Brooklyn or the Bronx. And here in the cafeteria, my education took root. Here I learned that Faulkner was America, Dickens was politics, Marx was sex, that I came from a ghetto, and D.H. Lawrence was a visionary. Here, my love of literature named itself, and the immense value of thought, sheer thought, blossomed. I discovered that people were transformed by ideas, and that intellectual conversation was erotic. While we pursued the life of the mind, we felt known to ourselves and to one another. The world made sense. There was ground beneath our feet, a place in the universe to stand. City College made conscious in me inner coherence as a first value. I forgot to tell you, all this is in italics because I wrote it a long time ago. I wrote these words, no longer italics. I wrote these words some 40-odd years ago, and I was talking then about undergraduate life as I knew it at CCNY in the mid-1950s. Now I am proposing to write further about that time in that place, again as I knew it, which means that, rightly or wrongly, like Montaigne, I am going to assume that what was in me was in many others. Who were we? Where did we come from? What did we look like, trudging up the hill between Convent Avenue and the subway, sitting obediently in class, arguing madly as soon as the bell rang? We were the children of tailors, shopkeepers, factory workers, accountants, bakers, dress cutters, clerks, milkmen, bus drivers. Our shoes were scuffed, our clothes came from chain stores, our haircuts from neighborhood beauty parlors. And what did we know of the world? Nothing. At the same time, how many of us were wise beyond our years? One afternoon, during an English lit class, a number of us were buzzing about a boy sitting in the back of the room who looked nothing like us. He was slim and good-looking, his haircut was a work of art, and he was wearing a navy blue sweater. The wool was thin, that lay beautifully flat on his chest. I thought he was French. The girl in front of me twisted around in her seat and whispered, "He's from Bard." The girl on my left said, "Where's that?" The girl on my right said, "What's that?" But when the teacher asked us why Isabel Archer went back to Gilbert Osmond at the end of Portrait of a Lady, and a number of students, in perfect imitation of Henry James, called out that morally speaking it was the right thing to do, it was the girl on my right who said, "She's afraid of herself." And there you had City College. Unworldliness trumped by the insights of lived experience. Throughout the school's history, lived experience had held pride of place, and I dare say still does. Not so many years ago, I was told that a writer who had taught at 2 posh schools and then at City College said, at Chicago, all they wanted to know was, what's the theory? At Yale, all they wanted to know was, what's the technique? At City, all they wanted to know was, how does this relate to real life? Here's another sentence of italics. Let the children of the rich and the poor take their seats together and know of no distinction save that of industry, good conduct, and intellect. The year was 1847, and the words were those of Townsend Harris, the progressive head of New York's Board of Education, who, in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, foresaw a small-town future for New York unless the city started educating a greater proportion of its native population to become the teachers, lawyers, doctors, administrators necessary to run a major metropolis, which meant largely turning to the first or second generation children of those immigrants, mainly then from Northern and Western Europe, who were either dead poor or not affluent, just not affluent enough to send their children to one of the city's private institutions, chief among which were Columbia College, later Columbia University, and the University of the City of New York, the future NYU. Due to the remarkably large number of progressives in city government at that time, men who responded favorably to Harris's prod, a statewide referendum was floated on the question of whether to support a tuition-free school of higher education in New York City. And in May of 1847, the referendum was ratified by a vote of some 19,000 in favor, as opposed to about 3,000 against. Surprisingly, among the nays was Horace Greeley, the famous founder and editor of the New York Tribune, and at the time, a member of the city's Board of Education. Greeley was neither the first nor the last prominent New Yorker to argue against the expenditure of public funds for this project. It is the historic bane of our shared social existence that will look sufficient to those on one side of the aisle to secure a decent life for our nation's citizens seems pitiably insufficient to those on the other. And so it has gone for the nearly 200 years since with regard to municipal support for public higher education. As there was no public high school system at the time, after 8th grade, almost everyone went to work. The school was conceived as a combination prep school and college, and as such, was to become the first tuition-free school of higher education in the country. Originally known as the Free Academy, it opened its doors on January 29, 1849, in a building on the corner of 23rd Street and Lexington Avenue, to an entering class of 143 boys between the ages of 13 and 15. At its opening assembly, the president said, quote, "The experiment is to be tried whether the children of the people, the children of the whole people," that always means working class, "can be educated, and whether an institution of learning of the highest grade can be successfully controlled by the popular will, not the privileged few, but by the privileged many." The 1847 class of students were admitted upon the recommendation of grammar school principals and an oral examination in reading, writing, grammar, geography, arithmetic. It's remarkable the number of subjects they were tested in. Once admitted, students undertook to follow a curriculum that consisted of mathematics, history, language, literature, drawing, natural philosophy, law, and political economy. Try that one today. The students were mainly the sons of artisans and factory workers, as well as merchants and businessmen. Those in the first category were less likely than those in the second to stay the full course, as they often had to go back to work. But from among those who did graduate came a rich cache of professionals: lawyers, doctors, architects, clergymen, teachers, who served the metropolis well and often went on to become prominent in New York City government, a record that continues to this day. In 1866, the Free Academy was renamed the College of the City of New York, and in 1929, the name was once again changed to become the City College of New York, and then finally City College of the City University of New York. Today, it boasts a student population of 16,000 undergraduates and graduates studying across 8 professional schools and divisions. Historically speaking, it also boasts the first student government in the nation, the first national fraternity, oddly enough, to function regardless, it says, of race, religion, color, or creed. I doubt that, but that's what it says. The first degree-granting evening program, a whole lot of firsts, and plus 10 Nobel Prize winners, many Pulitzer Prize winners, and thousands of people serving the city in all these different capacities over all these years. Recently, a man who'd been a former classmate of mine at City said to me, "In my neighborhood, you went to grade school, you went to high school, and then you went to City College." It was the same where I lived. City College was spoken of as though it was an extension of the public school system, only the formula usually applied to the boys in the neighborhood, not the girls. Every girl I grew up with went to secretarial school after high school. We'd all gone to Theodore Roosevelt High School in the Bronx, and then they, the girls, got married, went to secretarial school, had a job for a couple of years, got married, end of story. I was the only girl on the block who went to college. And how, one might ask, did that come about? It was my mother who had encouraged me to take the academic, not the commercial course when I entered high school. This had been an act of stubborn courage on her part, because at the time, my father, who died young, had been gone only a few years. My mother was barely holding the house together, and she knew that her family had expected me, at the age of 17, to go out and get a job. When it turned out that I badly wanted to go to college, she held her ground. Where is it written that a working-class widow's daughter should go to college? My Uncle Jack asked, drinking coffee at our kitchen table on a Saturday morning in my senior year in high school. Here it is written, my mother said, tapping the table hard with her middle finger. Right here it is written, the girl goes to college. Why, he pursued, because I say so. But why? What do you think will come of it? I don't know. I only know she's clever, she deserves an education, and she's going to get one. This is America. She's not a cow in the field only waiting for a bull to mate with. Where had that come from, I had wondered. So I went to City and I majored in English. When I graduated and she discovered that I wasn't a teacher, she really thought that a girl goes in one door marked college and comes out another marked teacher. She felt swindled. "You mean you're not a teacher?" she said to me, eyes widening as her two strong hands held my diploma down on the kitchen table. "No," I said. "What have you been doing there all this time?" she asked, clearly dumbfounded. "Reading novels," I replied. I might just as well have said preparing for interplanetary travel. She marveled silently at my chutzpah. "Now what?" we both thought. "Whatever you do," laughed my unhelpful big brother, "don't learn stenography." My mother didn't know what he meant, but I did. Learn steno and the college education goes down the drain. I'd settle for a glorified secretarial job, get married, and call it a life, which was pretty much the course my girlfriends had followed, minus the 4 wasted years at school, as my uncles thought. And the one my mother's family certainly thought appropriate for me, whose intellectual snottiness they found either puzzling or enraging. Even the relatives who thought they loved and admired me couldn't understand why I was delaying the obvious and the inevitable, a good job and an even better provider, especially the latter. But therein lies another tale, one that includes discovering that during my time at City, not only were the brightest students often among the most unworldly, so too were their equivalents on the faculty. In my junior year, I had fallen madly in love with my American lit teacher, a homely bachelor in his late 30s, possessed of a mortifying shyness that evaporated the moment he began speaking modernism in the American novel. Henry Levinson, in front of the class, was literature incarnate. My friends were horrified. "How can he turn you on?" one of them cried. "He looks like a mole burrowing up Convent Avenue." But I was besotted. "I don't care what he looks like," I replied. "He has a beautiful soul." A year after I graduated, Professor Levinson called me up and invited me out to dinner. I was 22, he was 40. We met at an expensive restaurant in Midtown, and I was grateful that he didn't try to shake my hand, which at the moment was cold and clammy to the touch. Within the hour, however, my palms were warm and dry, not because I was more at my ease, but because, to my everlasting confusion, I was bored. Outside the classroom, Henry Levinson was something of a dullard. When I came home to the Bronx that night, my mother and her sister, my Aunt Minnie, were waiting up for me in the kitchen. "Well," they both asked eagerly. I don't know," I said, and I could hear the puzzlement in my own voice. "I was bored." Minnie looked confused. "What is she talking about, bored?" Calmly, my mother asked if I would go out with him again, should he ask. "Yes, I guess so." She looked grave. "Give it another chance," she advised. But the second date was as unsatisfying as the first. "2 was not enough," my mother said. "Give it one more chance." On the third date, Levinson asks me if I consider marrying him. I can still feel myself shrinking back in my seat at the restaurant table, as though I was about to come under physical attack. Poor Levinson. Years later, I discovered from a confidant of his that he had decided it was time to get married, and he had a list of potential candidates that he was pursuing, nearly all former students. I, it seemed, was third on the list. I came home and pronounced my brilliant teacher a madman simply by reporting that he had suggested we marry. Minnie's mouth fell open, and my mother stared at me. When she asked me what I had said, it was my turn to stare. "No," I replied slowly, as though speaking to someone who didn't understand English. I said no. Minnie clapped her hands to her forehead and cried out in Yiddish, "Oh my God, she's thrown away the professor." A year later, Levinson married the next girl on the list, but I did not learn stenography. Should I go on? City College and the Jews. I might as well get this out of the way right now. When I was growing up and daydreaming myself a student at the school, it never occurred to me to consider the Jewishness of its student population as a characteristic to take into consideration. This, no doubt, was because I came from a left-wing household where the question of class prevailed. So when I got to college, I was only aware of the students as overwhelmingly working class, which was why I imagine I felt at home the moment I set foot on Convent Avenue. But of course, it was mainly a Jewish working class into which I had so naturally melted. Thus it was that I didn't know, that is, really know, that the whole world wasn't Jewish until I graduated from City. To a large degree, I credit this experience with making and keeping me the urban provincial I am to this day. It is only now that I see the Jewishness of City College as a classic demonstration of one of the odd ways in which the American experiment with public higher education developed. Throughout the better part of the 19th century, hardly any immigrant from Eastern or Southern Europe imagined sending a child to college. If you were well off and you dreamed of improving lives for your sons, only the sons, it was through making good in some entrepreneurial enterprise, not through more schooling. However, the great wave of immigration into the United States from 1880 to 1920 coincided with the nationwide explosion of the demand for public higher education. And the Jews as a whole, and this was the game changer, responded more quickly to the possibility of educating their children than did other ethnicities. In consequence, by 1902, an editorial in the Yiddish newspaper, The Forward, could observe, "You don't find many German, Irish, or Italian children in City College. About 90% of the boys there are Jews, and most of them children of Jewish workers," end quote. These Jewish boys were, in fact, no more intellectually gifted than the sons of any of the other immigrant cultures. They were, however, famously the progeny of one that characterized itself as the people of the book, fiercely motivated by an inherited reverence for learning, coupled with a passion either for getting on in the world or changing the world. From birth on, these children had been urged to believe they must do better, they must make a mark, they must succeed. Thus was created the stereotype of the successful CCNY student as smart, poor, overachieving, Jewish. Not, however, cultivated. To be a cultivated college student throughout the 19th century and decades into the 20th meant one was well-dressed, a practitioner of Christian manners and mores, and an accomplished sportsman, none of which characterized the Jewish students ever. In an article entitled How Jewish Quotas Began, published in Commentary in 1971, its author, Stephen Steinberg, tells us that a 1923 article in The Nation observed gleefully that, quote, "There are, in fact, more dirty Jews and tactless Jews in college than dirty and tactless Italians, Armenians, or Slovaks." It was these dirty, tactless Jews who made of City College, as Irving Howe, in his industrial strength history of the Jews in America, World of Our Fathers, puts it, a place both grubby and exalted. That was his phrase, grubby and exalted. Bernard Hirschkopf, class of 1906, attests to the exalted part. The classrooms were bare, the chairs and desks are the plainest, the blackboards grayed over with chalk dust, the library crowded and old, but as against that, there were the students. Scores of them thirsted for learning as men lost in the desert must thirst for water. None could halt or defeat such deep-rooted determination to learn. We knew it as gospel truth that this plain college was for each of us a passport to a higher and a more ennobled life. Of course, the real reason many would say that the high percentage of Jewish students achieved so early at City College was that first, throughout the 19th century and much of the 20th century, there were severe quotas placed on the acceptance of Jewish students at almost every private institution of higher learning in the States. And second, by the turn of the 20th century, the fortunes of third and fourth generation Gentile immigrants began to improve so significantly that those among them who shrank from close association with large numbers of Jews began sending their children elsewhere. Inevitably, the more the school was referred to as the cheder on the hill, cheder is the Hebrew word for house of study, the more City College was left to the Jews, who again, as Irving Howe tells us, loved the place, loved it utterly, hopelessly, blindly. For them, of all the institutions the Jewish immigrants and their children might encounter in the New World, City College came closest to fulfilling Emerson's promise that, quote, "This country, the last found, is the great charity of God to the human race." Today, when the Jewish majority at City College has long been replaced by students of every color and creed and point of immigrant origin, I dare say many feel the same. I think I'll stop there.